I'm the MC, apparently. I was just told that. So I'm MCing right now. Lacey from Paw Daddy Donuts, be sure to go back there and get one of these three-toed fritters that she has. They look accurate to the detail and they taste even better. You can say you ate a Fouke Monster footprint. And she's got all kinds of other snacks and other things. But so anyway, without further ado, the one guy I didn't introduce is going to be up here speaking next. I don't even see him. Oh, he's over here. He's silent. He creeps through the bottoms. You don't see him. He's like the monster itself. This guy right here, he and I have been tromping through the woods and waterways of Fouke for years. He's helped greatly in my research and my books. He's, well, we're tied for being the most geeked out Boggy Creek fans ever. Mr. Jerry Hestand.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Woolheater, sir. Thank you, Lyle. Oh, Fouke, Arkansas. You don't know how stoked I am. I mean, I am just all wound up. I just got to look around and see all the people here. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to start out by helping me and helping other speakers. How many people have seen the movie The Legend of Boggy Creek? Raise your hand. Oh, great. Thank you. The rest of you, shame on you. But I met a guy about 10 years ago. I was in a group called the Texas Bigfoot Research Center, and we had a meeting in Texarkana. And this guy showed up in a black cowboy hat. He had a real good-looking wife. I noticed that right off the bat. And after the meeting, I said, "Do you want to join our group?" And he said, "Yeah, I think so." And we got to talking, and I realized he was one of the few people in the world that loved this movie, The Legend of Boggy Creek, as much as I do. So, but now I have to add to the list Pam Pierce, because she obviously loves this movie very, very much because her father made this great movie. So, without ado, you can see what I'm talking about today. There was a quote in the movie that said, "The first thing we determined was he always followed the creek," which meant they always followed the creek, because you can't just have one, can you? I mean, Boggy Creek had a mama Boggy and a daddy Boggy and a cousin and aunt and a cousin, a nephew. And he met his wife, Mrs. Creek, and they had little Boggy monsters, and they're still creeping and lurking around all over the place, believe it or not. This is a picture of a lake near Fouke, Arkansas. A man by the name of Doyle Holmes, a local, found a trackway after a sighting, and he cast a track, which I have on my table. There was a film crew there doing a documentary, a man by the name of Seth Breedlove. While his film crew was here, they heard some strange vocalizations. I had been there previously, and I had heard some strange vocalizations. The last trip there, my friends Marvin Leeper and John Harrell and I went over to where we heard the vocalizations, and there was a huge stand of cane. We call them cane breaks here in the South, and that's going to be important later in my talk. But spooky picture, and let's get on with it. I've been doing this for a long time. Craig Woolheater started the Texas Bigfoot Researcher along with Luke Gross. Met him in Dallas, Texas, and I've been doing it a long time. Everything you'll see today is in my book. This isn't stuff that I've looked up on the internet. This is firsthand experiences. So, get ready. We got a long trip, folks. I got a lot of stuff to show you. On the left is Travis Crabtree in the movie The Legend of Boggy Creek. And I met his dad, Smokey, and I said, "What's that little kayak hanging up in your garage?" He said, "Jerry, that's a pirogue. It's a little lightweight boat that we build to get around in tight places when we're trapping." So I looked it up on the internet and I built my own. That's me on the right with my pirogue that we've been up and down Mercer Bayou many times in. And this is where I found it. If you guys have woodworking skills or a shop, you can go online at $50. You can get a kit to build your own. I don't know if it takes 6 hours. It took me like 2 months, but you can build your own pirogue. And there's my buddy Smokey Crabtree. I'll never forget. We spent all day out on Mercer Bayou one day, and the man taught me everything I know about wildlife and stalking animals. There's where we're going to end up. The Sulphur River Wildlife Management Area, just right down the road. And there are some of the rivers that flow into and around Fouke, Arkansas. And we're going to visit some of these places. That's Mercer Bayou. A friend of mine is a pilot. We flew over it. Actually, we flew over Caddo Lake, Jefferson, Fouke, Arkansas, and up into the Ouachita Mountains. And I'll tell you, folks, looking down, there is nothing but trees in East Texas. I know there's houses and roads down there, but nothing but trees. I didn't misspell that. I grew up in a little town called Howe, and in my book I talk about how I became involved as a Bigfoot researcher. Because people ask, what made you want to be a Bigfoot researcher of all things? Well, as a child, you're influenced by what you see and do. This is the little dirt road and the little house, and there was no wildlife per se. I was happy to see a jackrabbit or a roadrunner. We had horned toads, but that's it. We didn't have alligators and bears and mountain lions and stuff like that. So I got hooked on alligators. My parents took me to Hot Springs, and we went to the alligator farm every summer, and I was fascinated. Craig Woolheater was the same way. Probably we were there at the same time, staring at each other through the chain link fence, looking at the alligators. And my family loved wildlife, and we watched Disney documentaries about wildlife. My uncle was with MacArthur in the South Pacific campaign in World War II. And among many other pictures, he showed me this one of a giant crocodile that his team killed, probably when in Australia. And when I saw that, I was hooked. I said, man, I have got to go somewhere and see live wild alligators. Later on, when I became an investigator, I'd already been looking at the Fouke area and Mercer Bayou area, and I'd seen alligators finally. Mission accomplished. But this picture shows, it's an okay episode. Some of it's kind of silly, but the episode is good in that it shows where I'm researching now and how it's connected to Fouke, Arkansas. And our organization uses the same things that hunters use. We camo up. There's a bottle of scent cover in the front. We cover our scent. We go slow, and that's how we try to find our prey. And that night, we were on the show, and part of it was we went down Mercer Bayou in the dark, and these little red eyes were going back and forth in the water, and they were alligators, and it was cool. So, mission accomplished. This is a little baby I took a picture of at Mercer Bayou. Looks like a big one, but it's not really that big, but, you know, we snuck up on it and took its picture. Next part, my cousin babysit me. Isn't he a cute little boy? She babysit me, and she read Nancy Drew mysteries to me. And I decided I want to solve mysteries when I got older. So I solved mysteries when I became a Bigfoot researcher. And here's one of the mysteries I solved a couple of years ago. There's a guy in California by the name of Daniel Perez, and he puts out a newsletter every month called Bigfoot Times. And he'd call Lyle and said, hey, I've got a story about a gorilla in Sherman from 1962, and Lyle said, call Jerry, he can look it up. So I looked it up, and I found this old newspaper article. And basically, the story goes that this teenager in the picture was laying in bed one afternoon, looked out the window, and there was a gorilla in the driveway. Called his dad, didn't believe him, got his gun, went out in the yard, and there was a gorilla. He shot at it a couple of times as it walked off, kind of grunted and kept going. They called the neighbors, said, hey, do you want to see a gorilla? Go look in your front yard. And they looked out the window and they said, yeah, there's a gorilla walking towards Blue Creek. About 3 o'clock the next morning, there's a man driving down a 2-lane blacktop near Choctaw Creek. And he looked in the bar ditch and there was a gorilla. Scared the crud out of him, so he went to 7-Eleven, called the police. Police came, couldn't find a gorilla. Went back to these people's house, looked around, couldn't find a gorilla. So, fast forward to 2017, I met the young boy who is now my age, and I said, "What did the gorilla look like?" He said, "Oh, it was huge. It was 7 foot tall." "Oh, 7 foot tall gorilla? Really? Well, did it go down on all fours?" "Oh, no, it was walking upright the whole time. It was cold, black, and scary." So I got to thinking to myself, I don't think that was a gorilla, honestly. But the key part is it went to Blue Creek, which flows into Choctaw Creek, which flows into the Red River, and the Red River runs in near here. Charles B. Pierce, my hero, he made the movie The Legend of Boggy Creek. Lyle shared this picture with me, and he's probably right there on the editing floor making the movie. I saw this movie when I was a freshman in high school. My dad came home and said, "Hey, there's this new cool movie all the men at the coffee shop are talking about." I said, "I know the one you're talking about. The kids at school said it's The Legend of Boggy Creek and it's really scary." So we went to see it, and I was blown away. Blown away. And my dad said, "It's only about a 3-hour drive. Maybe someday we'll go up there and look for it." So I determined, after seeing that movie, if anybody ever went to look for the Fouke Monster, I was going. And the years that followed, if you wanted to see the movie, you had to stay up late at night or look through the TV guide, which I did. And it was just on TV occasionally. Later on, you could get a VHS or a DVD. Mr. Ledwell was the backer for Charles Pierce. He had 18-wheelers and farm implements, had the money to back Charles Pierce. And it says the Ledwell movie trilogy, but there's The Legend of Boggy Creek, Bootleggers, and Winterhawk, which were all made by Charles Pierce. And we heard last night there's a good movie called Bootleggers that Pam Pierce may redo in Blu-ray format. And I got to meet, there's Glenn Carruth. Back January, we got to meet all the actors and actresses from the movie, and I was just blown away like I am right now. I mean, I got to meet Glenn Carruth, who played Bobby Ford, that crashed through the door in the movie. There's my buddy Smokey Crabtree. He was like a second father to me. Always went by and saw Smokey. He was in the movie. And that's the day we spent out on Mercer Bayou. And the reason I had that picture twice is because Smokey said, if you want to outdo this thing, which means outsmart, you're really going to have to be stealthy. He said, you guys in those kayaks, you're paddling like this. He said, you need to be smooth and slow. And Smokey taught me more about wildlife and hunting animals and how to get close to them than anybody else. That's a picture of a beaver. That's not from the movie. That's a picture of a beaver that I took in Smith Park. I was following Smokey's directions, paddling smooth and slow. And this beaver did not see me. I got within 20 yards of it and zoomed in on it, and it never knew I was there. And I would not have seen it unless I was paying attention. I was a teacher for 21 plus years. I'm retired now, but third grade wildlife management guy came from Hagerman Wildlife Refuge and talked to my class about wildlife, and he brought some antlers and turtle shells, and I didn't want to broach the subject of Bigfoot, so I said, hey, have y'all ever seen a mountain lion at Hagerman Wildlife Refuge, which is on Lake Texoma? Nope, no mountain lions anywhere. Maybe some down in the Big Bend, maybe some in Florida, but there are no mountain lions. Well, guess what was in the newspaper about 4 years later? There they are at Hagerman Wildlife Refuge making some casts of mountain lions. So you can't trust people when they say it's not here, because I've talked to a lot of people over the years, and they've said, I've lived here all my life, and I ain't never seen no monster. But then in a little while they'll say, well, you know, now that I think about it, my cousin, or I had a friend in school and that's the way it's gone. So we don't always know what's out there. I mean, there's a clear picture of a mountain lion. that was on the internet several years ago. Can anybody see the mountain lion? You're welcome to come up here closer, but if you weren't very, very careful and walking slow and quiet, you would never see this thing. And I've done the old circle trick. I don't know if you can see it now, but you really got to be on your toes when you look for these things. Here's another one I saw on Facebook, of all places, imagine that, of a leopard. And this one stumped me. I found the mountain lion, but the leopard just stumped me. And I still really can hardly see it. It is right... Where is it, Jerry? There it is, right there. There's its nose and its eyes and its ears and its body. And there it is, circle. I ain't never seen no monster. Well, you know what? You might not have been looking for a monster. I ain't seen no leopard. Well, maybe you weren't looking for a leopard. Lyle said, Jerry, we don't have to go out in the bayou to see the Fouke monster. Most of the sightings are on the road. So, folks, if you want to see the Fouke monster, I would just go out to Jonesville this afternoon or tonight and ride around, because that's where the thing's seen. And I bought this camera to mount on my dash. I've got a good setup where I can go 24/7, and I'm going to the Ouachita Mountains next week. I've got a head mount and a recharger so I can go 24/7, and if I see another one, I'll have some video. Texas Bigfoot Research Conservancy evolved into this group. I like the name wood ape because it's more descriptive. Kangaroos have big feet. Elephants have big feet. But when you say wood ape, people know what you're talking about. And we're a tax-free entity. All the money that we take in is tax-free, and we put that towards equipment, and we've got a lot of cool, expensive equipment. If you want to know more about us, my friend Seth Breedlove made a documentary, a series of Bigfoot episodes, and episode 5 is about Area X, where I researched. Some of you may have heard of it. Seth is at Small Town Monsters. You can rent it on Amazon Prime. Very cool. So, we were going to talk about rivers. Oh, yeah. Well, let's start with the Canadian River. Back many years ago, some archaeologists found the jawbone and teeth of a giant ape in Asia. Said it could have been 8 foot tall. It was named Gigantopithecus, and we theorize that this giant ape from Asia may have crossed the Bering Land Bridge over into the Pacific Northwest, where most of the reports come from. Theoretically, this animal could have followed the Native Americans that went on down to the Rocky Mountains, and we have a lot of reports of Bigfoot from the Pacific Northwest and the Rocky Mountains. I read a book about Texas Indians, and they said all the Plains Indians originated in the Rocky Mountains. There was a plague or a hostile tribe or something that drove them out into the Great Plains. They were already hunting buffalo, but they changed to primarily buffalo, and for a source of water, they used the Canadian River. Chapter 18 of my book, I'll try to make this short because it's a long story. Many years ago at this casino, and I'm making this up in my mind, I'm thinking this is how it went, but a security guard went to look at the footage from a video from the back parking lot the night before. There'd been a disturbance. And as he looked at the video, there was this huge black anthropomorphic shape that walked underneath an 8 foot tall street light, and its head nearly hit the street light. And I'm thinking he probably said, oh, that's one of those animals that move through our land occasionally, or that's a member of the tribe that moves through our land occasionally. Well, the word got out. People started inundating the casino, wanting to see the video. Bigfoot researchers, boom, just from everywhere, wanted to see the video. And the elders of the tribe said, nope, that's it. We've either A, destroyed the video, or B, it's locked up and you'll never see it. Fortunately, I had a friend, Roger Roberts, was in the BFRO, and he got to see the video before it was locked away, and he said, yeah, Jerry, it looked like a Bigfoot. It was huge and black. But it was in the Great Plains. How can a Bigfoot be in the Great Plains? Well, there's only one answer. It follows the Canadian River that runs by this casino. And that's my friend Mark Porter, done a lot of research with me, and he's trying to reach the street lamp. So imagine an animal that tall that its head nearly hit that. If you want to go to our website, woodape.org, you go to the articles and you go to possible wood ape photos from central Oklahoma. There's this picture. And the story goes that the elders of the tribe were cleaning up after a 4th of July party or something. One of the elders wasn't doing anything. They said, why don't you get out and do something? So he got out and he reached over and picked up a Coke can. And he said, look, I'm picking up a Coke can. Are you satisfied? Well, they looked at the picture back behind him, zoomed into it, and they found this. You know those stories where people go out, like in Finding Bigfoot, and they stand in the same location and they raise their hand? Well, I did that right where this creature was standing, and my head came to its shoulder, and it was about twice as wide as I was. So I got to think, number one, where do you find a guy that's 7 foot tall? Number two, where do you find a suit to fit a guy that's 7 foot tall? And number three, why would he walk around out in the woods hoping somebody might accidentally take a picture of him? So, do I think this is real? Possibly. My buddy Alton Higgins, he's the director of our group, and he just didn't fall off the turnip truck. The guy knows what he's doing. He's got his BS degree in wildlife biology and a graduate degree in zoology. He spent weeks and weeks out in the wild forest researching birds, trying to find bird populations. So he had a story from this casino. You can see the casino is there, and there's the road. And one day him and a buddy went out to put up a camera, and they walked out into the woods, and his friend said, I forgot the game camera cards. I'll be right back. So Alton was standing right about here, and he heard a buck snort at him. Well, he turned around and looked, and this large black bipedal animal ran through this gap in the tree line, and he said, I wonder if it was hunting the deer. And there you can see ceremonial grounds, which is a whole different story, camera location, and there's the land. So the Canadian River, yes. And there it is. There's about where the casino is. Many years ago, a fellow researcher lived in Wichita Falls, and we sent him a report. This family saw a white Bigfoot in the winter, in the snow, and it left tracks. And he went out and found the tracks, and he said, they sound credible, but a white one? Are you kidding me? A white Bigfoot would stand out like a sore thumb in the woods. Well, that's hard to believe. This is the Great Plains. Right about the same time, there was two guys that were traveling from Amarillo going home, and they had stopped out there somewhere. They either run out of gas or had a flat, and one of the guys was sitting in the truck, and he said, Jerry, believe it or not, we're out in the middle of the Great Plains, and this Bigfoot run right. I heard a sound, and as this sound approached the road, I flipped on the lights, and a Bigfoot crossed the road. I said, well, the guy sounded credible. I don't know. So out in the Great Plains, whoops, keep hitting the wrong button, we have Bigfoot. And why? Well, you look at the topography of Texas and the cross timber plains, there's an area of vegetation and trees that go through there. So there's Wichita Falls, there's Decatur, Texas. We had a report about 10 years ago. A guy said he saw a Bigfoot at a lake at a wildlife management area. My friend Chester Moore and his dad went up there, and they said they saw an animal in the same location. And Chester Moore tells you something. You can take it to the bank, and I'll talk about him later. But so we got Wichita Falls, Decatur, and right there is about where Lake Worth is. Has anybody ever heard of the Lake Worth monster? Oh, good, good. Well, the Lake Worth monster in the 70s was a white Bigfoot that showed up near this lake for weeks and weeks. And I met the lady that wrote the book about it, and she said, yeah, I saw it. It was white. A friend of mine by the name of Gino Napoli lived there in Weatherford. And back in the probably the 80s, he was out parking with his girlfriend, and they heard something, smelled something. He flipped on the lights, and there was a Bigfoot diving down into the creek. And his friends came back later, and it was still there. So there we have it, a long way from Fouke, Arkansas. There's a picture of the Lake Worth monster I talk about in Section 3. A white Bigfoot. Can you imagine that? We move further down the river. There's a place called Brown Springs. If you've ever drove from Dallas up to Oklahoma City on the interstate, just as you cross the river, there's a casino up there, maybe one of the biggest casinos in the United States. But right as you cross the river, that's hot Bigfoot territory. I met a fellow researcher in January who had been there, and he said he found some clear five-toed tracks, and he showed me the pictures. And he said while he was there, there were some other Bigfoot researchers looking around. So there you have it. There's the river, and there's a lot of thick brush. There's Brown Springs, interstate going up to Oklahoma City. So we're moving down the Red River. And you probably can't see all of this, but I was assigned North Texas, Southern Oklahoma, and Miller County when I became a researcher. And all around in this area, there's just too many stories to tell you. On both sides of the river, going up to the lake, there were sightings. And they weren't all at one time. They were decades apart. People didn't know each other. But I found it interesting, that close to me. A friend of mine was Cliff Griffin. He was in the BFRO along with some of the others, and he said, "Do you want to go to Monkey Island?" I said, "Why is it called Monkey Island?" He said, "Why do you think?" So this island was out in the middle of the river, and we kayaked, went and looked around, good habitat, all the food a big animal would need, and the water there, it looks deep, but a 7-foot tall animal could wade across that easily. So we looked around, and Monkey Island, one of the most beautiful copperheads I've ever seen in my life, we saw, and Cliff was brave enough to pick it up and show us his fangs. So any of you guys are amateur Bigfoot hunters, be careful, especially this time of the year. We move on past Lake Texoma over to Ector, Texas. This guy called me, and I went out to his property, and he said, every year in the spring, we have this animal that gets down in our creek and screams and yells for about 2 weeks, and then it leaves. We go to look for it, and we can't find it. And he said, this year, there's a clear 5-toed track. I was doing some gardening in the back, and he'd stepped in some soft soil, and I went and looked at it, and there was a clear, big 5-toed track. He said the week before, his daughter was driving home from Sherman, Texas. She had a job at the Jack in the Box. She was driving home at 3 o'clock in the morning, and she said it looked like Harry and the Hendersons monster ran across the road in front of her. So I said, what's the name of the creek? And he said, Caney Creek. And by golly, folks, I'll tell you, over the years, I know I've investigated at least a half a dozen to a dozen Caney Creeks. Well, where did you see it? Well, it was up at Caney Creek. Caney Creek, Caney Creek. And I got to thinking, you know what? Gigantopithecus ate bamboo like the giant panda. It goes to reason that Bigfoot in the United States could eat river cane, and it could hide in river cane. Big cane breaks, like I talked about at the beginning, are a perfect place to hide. And on the left is a lady showing cane. On the right, I'm at a cane break that's just starting to grow. And my friends Marvin Leeper and John Harrell have seen these Bigfoot animals around this cane break more than one occasion. And it'll eventually, on the right, will get big like that. I talked to a researcher in April, and he investigates the Sabine River. And he listened to my presentation. He said, Jerry, I've found cane breaks just like you're talking about, and I found places where the cane is chewed up and spit out. And I remember my parents growing up, they had sugar cane, and they would, at the right time of the year, they would crush the cane and get the sugar out of it and make syrup. So these animals could be eaten Kane and living in Kane. Incidentally, the Florida panther nearly became extinct, and the reason was because they lived in cane breaks. That's where they raised their young. That's what they had to have to survive. So they had to cut back on the developers destroying cane. So here we've gone from the panhandle of Texas up and down and all around, and we're getting close to Fouke, Arkansas. And we might as well just give it up and look at the Bigfoot sightings. And it correlates with the rainfall. If it's over 50 inches of rain, that's where they're seen, and that makes sense, doesn't it? That's where the most vegetation is, that's where the most rivers and creeks are, and it kind of goes without saying. One of our first encounters with this animal is on Cooper Lake. They dammed up the Sulphur River, and it's a long story, but this lady had some encounters with it. We went to her property. We started setting up overnight investigations, and we had what we believe were encounters with this animal. And look, looks like a jungle, doesn't it? You drive an hour and a half out of Dallas, Texas, and you're in, like the documentary said, the forest primeval. You drive an hour and a half out of New Orleans, and you're in the forest primeval. So it looks kind of like Mercer Bayou, doesn't it? Hopkins County detective joined our group, and the reason is, he said one afternoon he was at home, friend called him, said bring the biggest gun you got, bring your dad. He was a Dallas police officer, and he said there's two big huge hairy animals kill my hogs pulling over the fence, and they drug it down the creek. So he went down there and they cast this track, one of the best tracks I've ever seen, and it went to the creek, and this creek ran into the Sulphur River. I had to laugh. I looked up Lake Crook because we did an investigation there, and I did a Google search, and it had a murder story, then another murder story, then another murder story. And I remember when Craig and I first went to Lake Crook near Paris, Texas, not Pat May's lake, but Lake Crook, the locals said, be careful if you go in there because the Dallas Mafia come up here and dump bodies in the creek. Were you there, Ruth? I bet you were, but anyway, I got to thinking, oh yeah, when we went to Brown Springs over there on the interstate, they told us the same thing. Be careful when you go out there because the Dallas Mafia comes up here and dumps bodies. So I carry a gun every time I go out, not because I'm scared of bears or snakes or Bigfoot. I'm scared of people. And actually we had a guy in the group called the Dallas Police Department, and they said, yeah, they do go up there and dump bodies. But the story I'm wanting to get to involves this picture of this wrecker. The story goes, this woman had a boyfriend that had a wrecker. He said, baby, you want to go with me? It's a pretty Saturday afternoon. I got to go pick up a car. And she said, yeah. He said, well, I'm going to cut through the old Lake Crook Road. She said, no, we'll get stuck. It's an old pig trail. It's too rough. Don't go that way. He said, yeah, I'm going. Well, guess what? He got stuck. So he got stuck in a wrecker. He said, sorry, baby, it's muddy. I've got on mud boots. I tell you what, you sit in the wrecker. It'll take me about an hour. Just lay down and take a nap, and I'll be right back. Well, she laid down in the seat, was taking a nap, and she heard a disturbance up on the hill. She looked out the window, and there was this huge ape coming down the hill, followed by two other apes. And she could tell by their anatomy that the one in front was a male, and the two in the back were female. The male was coming towards the wrecker, and the two females was screaming at him like, stay away, stay away. The animal came up to the passenger window. She rolled it up real quick and locked the door. The creature moved around the front of the wrecker, and she was rolling the driver's side window up when it reached its hand through and grabbed her by the ankle. She was screaming and crying to high heaven. It had a hold of her, had put a big gash in her leg where its sharp fingernail cut her. She looked down in the floorboard, and back in those days, Coke bottles were made of glass. So she grabbed a Coke bottle and just started beating on this animal's knuckles as hard as she could, and it let out a scream and let go. and then finally they disappeared. Naturally, she was in hysterics for about an hour till her boyfriend got there. They got the truck unstuck, took her to the hospital, sewed her up, and she had to be medicated for many years because of the trauma. And once again, a friend of mine, did some research and called the hospital, and they looked up the records. They said, yeah, this woman came in and said a Bigfoot had grabbed her, and we sewed her up. And it's a true story. So Paris, Texas isn't that far from the Red River, and the Red River comes in this area. And I don't even have time to talk about Caddo Lake. Craig has a conference there in Jefferson every October. You can just Google and Google and Google. It's called the Caddo Critter. And this week I looked on Facebook, and the Southeast Texas Bigfoot group has 2 videos from Strange Vocalizations. And I don't know what they are, but they're pretty cool. So Caddo Lake is just a skip and a jump from Fouke, Arkansas. And I fixed this, but it looks like it got unfixed. I'm going to talk about Atoka County real quick. We're going to back up. There's Atoka County. It's not that far away from the Red River. My friends, Mark Leeper and John Harrell, stand up, guys, please. Stand up. Oh, well, that figures. Mike, you stand up, please. These guys have been researching this area. And there's a ton of stuff. I talked about the canebrake picture. There is a lot of stuff going on at these other boggy creeks, and these boggy creeks run into the Red River. How long ago, John? 2016? They found this trackway along the Clear Boggy, and it's the best trackway I've ever seen. Clearly 5-toe track. Somebody said, well, it looks human. No, that's a big old bulbous toe, big toe, and the stride was really, really long, so it wasn't human. And then Honubby areas where I research now. And you can read this for yourself. All of these creeks and rivers run into near Fouke, Arkansas. And there's Lake Fork run into the Red River. And there's Little River County, Arkansas, right north of us. A lot of sightings up there. I've been up there myself and had an strange encounter one night. And I borrowed this from Lyle, guys. If you want to see the Fouke Monster, go to Jonesville. That's where he has been seen. Originally, it was called the Jonesville Monster. But you can read that for yourself. And all these rivers and creeks and wildlife management area surround Jonesville. And you can't miss it. Just drive down Highway 71 going south, and there'll be an itty-bitty sign that says Jonesville. This is a picture. Who knows what time it is? Anybody? What time? 10 to 11. Uh-oh, I better hurry up. We did an overnight investigation. A coon hunter said he was hunting coons one night, got separated from his friends. He heard a monster, or he didn't know it was a monster, but something was crashing through the water. In his headlamp, he looked out, and there was this huge ape coming towards him. His dog was barking, wanting to get at it at first, but eventually the dog started cowering, and this animal hissed at him. It hissed at him and reached his hand up and splashed water on him and his dog, and they took off. Well, I'm going to do the vocalization minute. So, long story short, we met him in Fouke. He said, I'll take you out there, but I'm not going in the woods. We got out to the dirt road. He said, I'm not getting off the road. If you want to go look for it, it's down in there. If you want to spend the night, it's down in there. But I'm not getting off the road. Matter of fact, once it starts getting dark, I'm leaving. So we spent the night. We decided to sleep till 3 o'clock in the morning, and we started broadcasting these vocalizations from a loudspeaker. And as I sat and listened, I thought, we're supposed to play it once, and they're playing it twice. Why? I got to listening, and there was something deep down in the swamp mimicking what we were playing on the recorder. So it was either number 1, a known animal that makes strange sounds, number 2, a hoaxer that was out in the middle of the swamp at 3 o'clock in the morning hoping somebody would make vocalizations from a Bigfoot, or it's an unknown creature. So I'll play you what we heard and you can judge for yourself. So as my wife would say, that ain't no owl. That ain't no coyote. I don't know what it is. I think Lyle took the coon hunter story and put it on the front of his book. I think that's what it looked like. And that's what it looks like at night. The vocalization plays again, so I'm going to skip through it. I know this animal exists because I've seen it. Some people have taken this bird and collected a type specimen of it, put it on a dissection table, and put it in the correct category. Same thing with this bird. Scary bird, scary story. These wild hogs, they know what they are. Don't need to kill one of them and dissect it. They know what these are. But my friend Alton said there's a global decline in wildlife population, and that doesn't look like that sharp of a curve. But believe me, folks, it is. And there you can see why global habitat is decreasing. In red, we have habitat degradation. And that's what I'm seeing in my research area. Weyerhaeuser is clear-cutting old-growth trees, which they have a right as their property. But this is a huge habitat of these animals living in, and other animals. Other animals need hardwood bottomlands to live in. We need hardwood bottomlands to live in because that's where we can get our oxygen. Whoops. A friend of mine, Brian Brown on the left, is with Rob Lowe, the actor. They had a show about where we researched called The Wood Apes. This book was written by Monty Reel. It talked about the guy that first discovered the gorilla. And this guy knew gorillas existed because he grew up in Africa, but the Victorian England scientists disagreed. There are no large hair-covered human-like creatures. It's just a myth. He collected some skin and bones, sent it to Victorian England. They said, nah, that could be anything. Finally, they killed a gorilla, sent it to Victorian England. They said, well, okay, it could be something. So there you go. Last week, a friend of mine in the NAWAC contacted Jane Goodall. She'd heard of us before, but she was really excited. And she said, I think y'all are onto something. If you come up with something definitive, let me know, because I hope Boggy Creek, Fouke Monster, Wood Ape, whatever you want to call it, exist. Parallel to the Fouke Monster, up in Brinkley, Arkansas, they look for the ivory-billed woodpecker. It's supposed to be extinct in this part of the country. And the locals there have their own agenda. They sell cats, T-shirts, anything you can think of with ivory-billed woodpecker on it, kind of like the Monster Mart. And in the documentary, the guy said, hey, this is kind of like the Legend of Boggy Creek. They're looking for some unknown animal that's supposed to be extinct here in our swamps. My friend Chester Moore, he's a researcher, does a lot of good work, Christian, with children and animals, and he wrote a book about the ivory-billed woodpecker, and he said, you guys ought to look for it when you're down in the bottomlands, because if you found one, it would be great. So I'm about finished. A friend of mine by the name of Russell Graves made a documentary called Boat Goodbye, and up where I live, they dammed up Bodart Creek, and they're making a water reservoir, which we need water. That's the currency of the future. We got to have water. But they're damming up his family's property that have been there for decades and decades and decades. And he didn't take anybody's side. He said, I know we need water, but our property is gone. So what are we going to do? I saw a documentary about Las Vegas, and they said, look, Lake Mead's going dry. If you don't cut back on water, Las Vegas, you're not going to have any water. So they immediately put a program into place where they said, hey, you got grass in your yard, why don't you replace it with rock? Maybe we'll give you a tax incentive. Golf courses, try to find some different grass, maybe we'll give you a tax incentive. So they cut back 30%. My friend Chester Moore said, conservation is the wise use of our natural resources. I'm scared sometime a developer could come into the Sulphur Wildlife Management area and put up condos and don't think, oh no, that'll never happen. Oh yes, I've already heard a story that somebody attempted that. So I want to take my grandkids to Mercer Bayou. I want to take my grandkids to these creeks and places, not necessarily to look for Bigfoot, but look for all the animals that depend on places like the Sulphur Wildlife Management Area. This is me at Boggy Creek about a year ago. Eddie Burgess, a local guy, took Lyle and me down to Boggy Creek, and it just wound through his property for miles and miles. I had a sighting in 2015. I know these animals exist, but I'm still kind of wondering, what's it all about? What's going to happen? So that's it, folks. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. I will be back at my table. I'm not sure who's speaking next. I tell you what, I think it's break time. So everybody have a break, and thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Jerry. Isn't he a wealth of knowledge and information?